Hello Reader Pops, welcome back to my channel. It's May 31st. I'm about to get on a plane to visit the book girlies. I'm so excited. Vlog's coming soon. You can see what happens on Instagram as it's happening. But I read 7 books in May and I'm very excited to tell you my thoughts on them because I read an interesting amalgamation of books. I think this is my first reread of a book in my adult years because I remember being in middle school and I would just reread the same books over and over again. Like I read Twilight probably 3 or 4 times, read The Fault in Our Stars 3 or 4 times, but in adulthood I haven't done that because it just feels stressful when you have so many books you want to read. But I decided to reread Beach Read by Emily Henry because in my mind I always say that this is my favorite romance book, but it was also the first one I ever read, so I didn't know how much of that bias was going into that review. So I really wanted to find out by just rereading it and then annotating it. I also was annotating it to just see how she writes the first chapters of her books to give me some inspo for trying to write a story. So that was really fun because I was paying a lot of attention to every word choice. So fun. And there's actually so many plot lines in this book that I completely forgot about, like January's backstory with her family. So many things I just completely forgot because it had been 2 years, and it is still a 6-star read for me. Is it actually a 6-star book? Probably not, but personally, just because of how I relate to the characters, it is, because I remember originally reading it and it was a 4-star, and then as time went on, I just wouldn't stop thinking about the characters, and then it became a 5-star, and as even more time went on, for some reason, this just feels like my book. Like it feels like a thing that I read where it's like my characters, not like I made them, but like am I explaining this well? I feel like I'm not explaining this well at all, but it feels personal to me, okay? So that's why it's a 6-star read. I love it. You have to read it. Some people don't even like it that much, which is totally fine, but something about it is special to me. Next, I started a video called Reading 5 Summer Books in 5 Days, and I started with Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune. This author kind of just came out of nowhere last year when she released Every Summer After, and then a lot of people said that that book was like a almost exact copy of Love in Other Words. Not to a T, but just very similar things happened with the childhood friends to lovers trope. Then at the end of that book, there's a trope that is pretty widely hated, I would say, and I was curious to see if that trope would be happening in this book, and honestly, it kind of does. I find that interesting. If you look up any of the Goodreads reviews on these books, you'll figure out what trope I'm talking about pretty immediately, but I just won't say just in case you don't want to know. So yeah, it's an interesting premise because it's about these 2 characters who have only ever met once 10 years ago, and they spent 1 day together and they really hit it off, and then they were going to meet up again a year later, but he doesn't show up. So she's heartbroken over that, and then 10 years later, her mom has just passed away and she is given the family resort of cottages, and she's supposed to make the business thrive again, and her mom hired this guy from 10 years ago to help out with the business. And so he shows up. That's the book. I gave it 3 stars. I go very in depth into why I gave it 3 stars in this video. I felt pretty removed from the characters because they had only hung out together for a day, and so it wasn't that believable to me. And there was nothing about the main love interest that made me root for him really, so I was like, but 3 stars for vibes because like the family resort was a cool setting. And then I was reading an article about books to read for the summer, and I saw this one, A Perfect Vintage by Chelsea Fagan, and she's actually the co-owner of The Financial Diet, and the cover was just stunning, honestly, and the setting is what really got me because it is set in France and it's following a woman who revamps boutique hotels, or like in this case it's a chateau, which I think translates to castle, of this like rich French family who's given this chateau, so then she has to fly out, renovate it before they reopen, but then it basically becomes a family drama because she falls in love with one of the family members, but he is a younger family member. He's like 24, I think, and she's 32 or 36. It's like a 12-year age gap. Yeah, she was 36. I didn't know it was gonna be an age gap thing until I started reading it, and it's a little bothersome to me. It's not something that I would personally like want to pick up if I had known that, but before I knew that, I just saw that it was beautiful. It was in a summer article. It was in the French countryside with a rich family, and so I actually DM'd Chelsea and asked for the arc because this doesn't come out until June 6th, and then she sent it, and then I found out all that stuff, so I was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna not read it now because the author just sent it to me, so I'm going to read it, and I ended up really liking it. Actually, I gave it 4 stars. Her writing style definitely stood out to me as something that I haven't really read before, and I feel like the point of it is to make kind of an unlikable character because you're following Leah, and she's like super stressed out all the time, and she's like kind of judgmental of her friend, but then she'll make the same mistake. So I feel like it's supposed to be this sort of thing where you're watching this lady like blow up her life, and it's frustrating, but that's kind of the point, and then everything does blow up at the end, which is really fun. It really felt like I was watching a movie when I was reading this book, so that's gotta go for something. So if you want like a juicy drama set in the French countryside for the summertime, you should definitely read this book. And then I read When in Rome by Sarah Adams, which came out of nowhere for me because I did read the cheat sheet by Sarah Adams and I gave it a 4.5 stars. And then when this one came out, I wasn't really in the romance reading mood, but I had it downloaded on my Kindle. And anytime I was traveling and I would randomly finish a book and I was like on a plane and I couldn't access any other books, I would read this one. So I'd read like 20% of it on Kindle over probably 3 months. And I thought that the way it started out was really cheesy because it's about this famous pop star who just wants to get away. So she just takes a random road trip to a tiny town called Rome, but then her car breaks down in this guy's front yard and that's who the love interest is. And I was like, this is so outlandish, this is so cheesy. But then at a different time when I picked it back up, I read through the entire thing and I actually ended up really loving it because I feel like the famous pop star's issues were actually very believable, and then the way that our main character was reacting to those issues was also very believable and made you root for the characters. And that's all I'm ever asking for, okay? And it worked in this book, so I gave it 4.5 stars. And then I read Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams, which comes after this book, and I do highly recommend you read this one first and then this one. I personally recommend that you read this one and then you don't read this one, in my personal opinion, because this one ended up being like a 2.5 stars for me. I don't know what happened. I think the premise is pretty different because this one is the sister of this guy's character, and then famous pop star's bodyguard is this dude here with the tattoos. And this trope was very like good girl, bad boy type of thing, and he's hired to like teach her how to go on dates. And it just didn't really feel like it was about them growing as people. Like I feel like that was added in there, but it did just feel more so like a more spice driven, which is like weird to say because Sarah Adams does not even really write spice, but it's like that was all they would talk about when they would talk about each other. And I was like, okay, I just don't really care that much. Like, why do you guys love each other? So yeah, I recommend this one, not this one, but you know, that's just me. I'm very particular about my romance books. Then I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which is the fantasy romance book that has been exploding all over Book Talk and Instagram and everywhere that people talk about books. And I was super excited to read this one because it's basically about a military school to learn how to ride dragons. And then it also has an enemies to lovers romance plot in it, which just sounds perfect. And it was sold out everywhere, so I don't have a physical copy of it, but I read it all on Kindle and I did really love it. It was a lot of fun to read. Like I remember waking up every day being excited to read the book, which is a great feeling. I feel like I haven't had that in a while, but I will say there were some lines in this book that really cringed me out, and for that reason I can't give it a 5 star. There is also some spice in that book, but I love how it ended, and because of how it ended, I do want to read the second book, and I did love reading about dragons. That was great. So yeah, I get the hype. I don't think I loved it as much as everyone else loved it. It's not a 5 star for me, but it did feel like reading Divergent, a little bit like reading the Shatter Me series. And I love both those books, so it was really fun. And then I just read The Grace Year by Kim Liggett yesterday. This is like a dystopian world, very reminiscent of The Handmaid's Tale, where women are kind of seen as objects in this society and men get to pick their wife. And then when they turn 16, they all have to go through the grace year where they're just like sent out into the woods. And then it's very like Lord of the Flies, where they're told that they have to go out into the woods for a year to get rid of their magic. No one knows what happens during the grace year. They're not allowed to talk about it with each other. And then when they come home after a year, there's usually like 9 girls who didn't survive. It was pretty scary. Like I couldn't read this book at night, but it was 400 pages. It's YA, so actually it's pretty shocking that this is YA. I'm not gonna lie, because there are some very graphic things in this book. It would be really good and then really terrifying and graphic all of a sudden, but it's super creepy. Like there's tension throughout the entire book because you just don't understand what's going on, because they don't know what's going on. They don't know what the grace year is. People are turning on each other. You don't know what's real and what's not. Like I kept expecting plot twists, and there are plot twists, but they weren't even what I thought they would be. So I was just flying through this book because I wanted to understand what was happening. And it was honestly a really good book. Like it's probably one of the most unique books I've ever read. It kind of reminded me of reading Bunny by Mona Awad, which is a horror book. So this is one of the scarier ones that I've ever read. So I would give it 4 stars, maybe like a 4.25, 4.5. Like it's up there. It's a really good book, but I would say don't read it unless you want to read a more like scary dystopian book. But it was a really fun change of pace after reading like cutesy summer reads. Those are the books that I read in May. They're really cute all together. But I'm about to head to the airport in an hour, so follow my Instagram to see that because I love getting together with the book girls. And then I also have a main channel and a TikTok if you wanna follow me somewhere else on the internet.